Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Dr. Crow joining us live from Regis High School there, too, getting some, some lifts and getting ready for some team pictures. First game tonight.
That's right, yeah, we got some lifting here this morning, then they got a freshman scrimmage, and then varsity heading up to Turtle Lake for the first game of the year.
All right. Getting excited, getting a little nervous. Is this your coaching debut coming up, too?
This is, this is going to be it. So I do have to say it is. It's good to get those competitive juices flowing again. So it's been awesome to be part of this, and I've enjoyed it a lot.
Awesome, good deal. Well, best of luck tonight to your boys and such. So
appreciate it.
First of all, I got to give you props. You called it on the Christian Yelich one, man, with his surgery. You found out what it was and that. So I guess now that we know it was a disectomy, right? With his
a discectomy.
Disectomy. Yep. Did I say dissectomy? Dissecting frogs. So now that we know what it is, what's kind of a typical timeline for a surgery like that for Christian Yelich? And is there any future concern with that back injury?
So when you look at the recovery, I mean, it's going to be months still. I mean, even though it's a relatively small surgery, it's going to be a while to let him go full. So certainly it's going to, as we know, put this season down. But as he progresses, there's a couple different things they look at. One is just simply like from the incision. So it is a relatively small incision. So they go inside and just remove that disc herniation. And with that takes the pressure off the nerve, which is where the pain was coming from. So they talked about how he had pain in the back and then going down the leg. And so that's what the idea behind it is, that you remove that disc, aka the discectomy. So there's the recovery from that, but for the disc to come out, it has to rip through the kind of the layer around the disc. And so you don't want to go too fast, otherwise you can risk a reherniation. So a lot of times they'll limit certain movements, a lot of twisting, lifting, things they want to be careful with. So it's going to be a couple months till he gets ramping back up. No, daily activity, walk around, you'll probably even see him doing that fairly soon because, we don't really limit just general activity. But to get back to, high-level sports, he's still got some time ahead of him before he's doing that. So, and then to that point, I already mentioned it, but the concern long-term is a reherniation. And depending on the size of the herniation, if it was very, very big, you lose some of the discs material, which is basically the shock absorber. So some people can eventually go on to have what's called degenerative disc disease, so kind of arthritis to the back. But odds are he won't be dealing with that anytime soon, unless he has like one or two reherniations and loses a lot of disc. But I think that would be unlikely.
Moving over to football here, A.J. Dillon has been sidelined the last few practices with what they're calling a stinger, but last year at the end of the season, he suffered a stinger and he missed some time. And Matt LaFleur, the last couple of days, has said we're still gathering information on it, coming up with a game plan, because as he noted, when something's kind of a repeat injury, it's a cause for concern. And I remember back in the day, maybe a few years ago, when you heard somebody had a stinger, it's like, oh, they're not going to be out that long. So now that he's dealing with this again and that the Packers are, quote, being cautious with it and gathering more info, do you think potentially there's something more going on than just a stinger with A.J. Dillon?
Yeah, I mean, the wastebasket term of stinger, like what we're kind of thinking of is when people take a real hard hit to the shoulder going down or the neck going over, and it's essentially a traction injury on the brachial plexus, which is the nerves that go from the neck down the arm. And so that's a classic one. Anyone who's played football has probably had them at least once or twice where you just this real, I mean, like the name, the sting. It's like this zap down your arm. If it's a bad one, you can have like a limp noodle for an arm for a second. It's pretty scary at first, and then everything kind of wakes up and feels okay. And if it's simple traction injury, that's mild. I mean, sometimes it just feels funny for a couple seconds. Sometimes it's a couple minutes, but it goes away pretty quickly. Now, sometimes when people have that, it's actually an issue in the neck, and I'm not saying his is, but it's certainly when you see these repeat things, you start worrying about that, where people can have narrowing in the neck, and it's actually a hit to the neck that pinches either the spinal cord or the nerves going out the side and can cause similar type symptoms, and that can be more concerning. So, I'm not saying that he has that, but that you start wondering, like, why is this recurrent? Because it's not something that usually happens over and over and over. It's not like it happened once and you're more susceptible to it. So I don't know if that, or potentially one of his stingers was a real severe one where there was actually a little bit of nerve damage, which is very uncommon but can happen. And then now it's just prone to happening again. So it's hard to say. It's a little bit of guesswork, but it certainly is something you don't usually see over and over and over. So it kind of makes you think, is there something else going on with it?
The way you mentioned that with the neck and the narrowing of that, I mean, are we talking, and again, like Sterling Sharp, we had a couple listeners say, is this a Sterling Sharp issue with his neck injury, or like Jermichael Finley, those type of guys? Is that kind of what you're referring to, that maybe possibly it could be?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, where you get this like narrowing in the actual cord, because there's a huge distinction between the nerves going down the arm, so what we call peripheral nerves, and the actual spinal cord itself. So if you injure the spinal cord, I mean, it speaks for itself, like it's a spinal cord injury. Those are devastating. So, and there are people who can get, I mean, the most extreme form of it is you get players who have transient quadriplegia. So they'll go on the football field, they'll take a hit, and because their neck is narrowed, it pinches the spinal cord, so they'll temporarily be paralyzed from the neck down. And, I mean, talk about scary. I saw that one time happen when we were covering at Virginia. We were playing down at the University of Miami, and we had one of our players take a hit, and he was transiently quadriplegic. So, like, on the field, we thought he was paralyzed. I mean, it was scary stuff. Luckily, it ended up being just that, where he kind of had some pinching. Now, he had some narrowing in his neck, and he ended up having to retire from football because of that, because just some people are born with that narrowing, and you can take a hard enough hit where some people can actually cause a spinal cord injury. And so it's scary stuff. So you certainly hope it's not that. And by now you think they probably would have mentioned it. So I don't know. It is definitely reading between the lines, but it certainly raises some eyebrows when people have that issue.
Yeah, definitely, because that's, you're talking about career ending. And, I mean,
yeah,
going with that, correct me if I'm wrong, could players still opt to play that, but they know the risks with that type of injury?
Yeah, you can. I mean, I'll tell you, if you have that transient quadriplegia, that puts the fear of God in you. I mean, imagine sitting there in the field, you can't move your body.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that really is a dose of reality. I mean, there's other analogies, like people have like the heart condition, so hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That's a debate too. Like, do you tell athletes they can't go, or do you say, hey, look, you're at risk for literally dropping dead? I mean, that's scary stuff too, of course. So, yeah, often we will kick it back to the player, but there are times where they won't be cleared medically. So at a Division I school, the medical staff will say, we are not going to allow this athlete to play. What if you were diagnosed at the professional level? I don't know. I'm not sure of any cases I can think of off the top of my head, but it probably would be a discussion that says, look, is this a risk you're willing to take? And I mean, if that's your livelihood and that's really your only way to provide for your family, it'd be hard to say no to that. But on the flip side, it's your life or the ability to move. That's a tough decision to make. So, yeah, I mean, there are certain circumstances where you're kind of walking that line. Those are obviously extreme examples of that, the heart and the neck issues where it's truly life and limb threatening.
Yeah, no kidding. He's Dr. Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine, joining us for Inside the Training Room. Your tight end, TJ Hawkinson, is recovering from a torn ACL and an MCL, and I was reading a little bit before you were on that expectation maybe in the middle of the season there. But with that, torn ACL, but plus the MCL, does that further complicate the recovery, or are they, because they're separate, it doesn't really complicate the recovery from the ACL part?
No, it does. And I don't know if he had a repair reconstruction of the MCL, if they're able to let that go, because sometimes you're able to just let the MCL heal up on its own. It depends on the severity. And I remember reading after his first injury and surgery, and they didn't really disclose what had happened. So if the MCL was lower grade and they allowed it to heal on its own, it shouldn't have a big impact. If he did require a repair or reconstruction on the MCL, then yeah, that certainly, usually it's a little harder to get the range of motion back, and it's another part of the knee that has to go through a healing process. So often that is, once you have more than one ligament, we call those multi-ligament knee injuries, and they certainly are a little more severe. And the analogy I like to tell my patients is you have four main ligaments in the knee, and think of it like a table with four legs, right? If you have one injured, it's unstable. Two, it's really unstable. And so once you fix two of them, to rely on two quote-unquote fixed legs, it is a little bit more of a challenge. So no doubt about it, it'll make things a little more complicated. But my hope is and assumption is that the MCL they allowed to heal non-operatively and then went after the ACL, but that I'm not sure on. But to talk about that timeline, that's about what I would expect from a guy recovering from a major injury like that. Certainly, I remember seeing that hit, and the first thing with that hyperextension injury, I'm like, I hope it's not his ACL. And sure enough, it was. So it's a tough thing to go through, but the good news is the success rate for that surgery is pretty high, so hopefully he gets back in the field and is able to go at a high level.
Last question for you, and I'll let you get going, but I saw this yesterday and I had to save it. It was an article from PackersNews.com where they talked about the injuries in Green Bay, at least in training camp right now, is there not really any major injuries. And the question they asked, could it be because they got a new athletic trainer or, strength and conditioning coach? Mm-hmm. Is there something to that where a change in training and working out could be the direct relation to non-injuries, or again, is it just kind of based off pure luck, do you think?
A mix. I would say more luck than anything, truth be told. I mean, there's no exercise that's going to make an ACL, never tear, or rip a pec or triceps or, things that these guys have happened to them. Now, on the soft tissue injury side, there's a little bit more debate on that. So guys with recurrent hamstring, hip flexors, calves, there's certainly something to be said for how you train the body, let it kind of heal after training and things like that. So it's possible that they had a change with the strength conditioning coach and they've seen a decrease. I mean, obviously, Watson with his hamstring, it seems like that's doing okay thus far. Maybe that. But if you're talking about big injuries, I mean, hate to be the bearer of bad news, that's just playing the lottery, right? Mm-hmm. Some teams get hit bad, some don't. Those things I think are just fluke. But when you're talking about the pulled muscles and tendonitis, yeah, I think that you could look at ways to treat that and address it. And if it's a real focus, that hopefully is something that the team doesn't have to deal with, and maybe that change did make a positive impact.
He's Dr. Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine for Inside the Training Room. All right, smile nicely for the pictures. Best of luck tonight, man. Enjoy it, and we'll be following you all season long, sir.
Sounds great. Have a good one.
You too. There you go, Dr. Crow, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine.